Hey guys, tonight we visit a place where the air smells like warm yeast, smoke curls from a single stone oven, and everyone in town knows what your dough looks like. Welcome to a medieval village where bread isn't just food. It's a public event, a point of pride, and occasionally a reason to throw shade at your neighbor. You're here to discover why an entire community shared one oven. And trust me, you probably won't survive this if you're used to microwaves and privacy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through damp straw and uneven cobblestones, your boots squelching slightly as you pass timber-framed houses with moss-stained thatched roofs. The village smells of livestock, wood smoke, and sour dough rising in wooden troughs. It's a few hours past dawn, and already there's a line forming near the great stone dome at the center of the green. The oven, your destination. The village hearth, both literal and symbolic. You approach it slowly. It looms large, an oven big enough to bake 20 loaves at once, its soot-blackened opening resembling a crouched mouth. Thick stone walls hold in the fading heat from yesterday's firing, and a single curl of smoke escapes like a sigh. You don't need to ask what's happening here. This is where the village bakes. You look around and notice familiar faces. There's Edith the potter, elbow deep in her canvas bread sack. Little Tom is using a stick to poke at the ashes, and someone's brought a stool, clearly prepared for the long wait. It's strangely cozy in that rustic, everyone knows your business sort of way. See, in this world, ovens aren't cheap. Building one means gathering and firing hundreds of bricks or stones, shaping a dome just right so the heat bounces, evenly. And it's not just a building project, it's a financial one. Heating the thing takes time and firewood, both of which are scarce and, more importantly, taxed. So most households don't have private ovens. They've got open hearths, maybe a spit for turning meat on a feast day, but not a fully fledged bread oven. That's why this hulking dome in the center of the village exists. It's the communal solution. Everyone chips in, everyone gets a turn. And you? You've got your lump of dough wrapped tight in linen, pressed into a round form and marked with your personal sigil. 2 crossed sprigs, a nod to your family's herb garden. You're proud of this loaf. It's part rye, part wheat, a little. Coarser than you'd like, but it smells promising, and you even snuck in a pinch of salt. A scandalous luxury, honestly. You catch a whiff of something burning. Someone's been overeager and shoved their loaf in before the oven cooled properly. Smoke tickles your throat, and you cough politely, as if to say, "Not mine." Historians still argue whether medieval villagers genuinely enjoyed this ritual or simply endured it. Was it bonding or just bred under surveillance? You suspect it was both. There's a comforting rhythm to it, kneading in the morning chill, waiting your turn, watching the fire glow orange through the opening like a low sun. But there's also pressure. Everyone's watching, judging, comparing crusts. A nearby woman tuts loudly and mutters, "Too slack, it'll collapse." She's talking about someone's dough, probably Marjorie's again, whose loaves consistently resemble overcooked mushrooms. You wonder if she'll try swapping it out for someone else's again, like last month, when 2 men nearly came to blows over a lopsided barley bread. One man begins to shovel out the ashes, revealing the glowing brick floor. The oven's ready. Here's the part modern brains might find most outrageous. You have to trust the oven keeper. Sometimes that's the baker, sometimes it's someone designated by the reeve, and other times it's just whoever showed up earliest with the shovel. This person decides the baking order, how long each loaf stays inside, and, most dangerously, whether your dough needs a bit more turning. You hand over your loaf reluctantly. The shovel scrapes, the heat stings your cheeks, and in it goes, set beside others like sunbathing turtles. It'll be 30, maybe 40 minutes. You could go home, but no one really does. Instead, you linger, because it's not just about baking. It's about watching, listening. You hear about Gerwin's missing goat, about Alice, who's courting, the miller's son, even though he smells like onions, and about a traveling friar who apparently preaches in rhymes. Someone sings a lullaby under their breath while bouncing a baby. Someone else passes around pickled onions. You try not to gag. There's something oddly soothing about the whole thing. The hiss of dough meeting hot stone, the quiet arguments over whose turn it is, the unmistakable sizzle when someone's loaf leaks honeyed fig paste onto the hearth floor. A small act of rebellion, that. And while everyone acts casual, eyes dart back and forth constantly, because bread is money. Bread is pride, bread is survival. Losing your loaf here doesn't just mean hunger, it means embarrassment. It means your neighbor might gloat for a week. It might even mean borrowing from the baker, which will cost you more than just flour. There's a long pause as the oven keeper leans in, checking crusts with a hooked rod. One by one, loaves come out, dark, steaming, dusted in ash. Yours is third, you hold your breath, perfect. Golden brown, a good rise, and, best of all, unmistakably marked. No swaps, no trickery. You cradle it like a newborn and offer a smug nod to the woman who doubted your hydration ratio. She doesn't meet your eye, but you hear her mutter something that sounds suspiciously like luck. You take a bite before it's cool. The crust crunches like dry leaves, and the inside is soft, warm, slightly nutty. For a moment, this life, mud, taxes, gossip and all, feels manageable. Then someone screams. A goose has stolen a still steaming loaf. It's going to be a good day. You return home with your warm loaf tucked under one arm, its scent following you like a promise. But don't get too cozy. This bread came at a price, and not just the aching back from all that kneading. Because in medieval Europe, making bread wasn't as simple as mixing flour, water and hope. No, it was a bureaucratic, smoky and sometimes downright petty ordeal. You head inside your wattle and daub hut, where the fire smoulders low and the walls always seem to smell faintly of cabbage. You toss your outer cloak aside, brush flour from your sleeves and stare at your little pile of firewood. 3 sticks, not enough to cook a stew, let alone heat a private oven, if you even had one. Which, of course, you don't. Very few people do. Firewood is expensive. That's the first snag. It's taxed by the Lord, yes, even the dead twigs lying on the forest floor, and fines for illegal gathering are steep. And heating an oven, that's an all-morning job. You'd burn through your woodpile faster than a monk downs ale at Michaelmas. You think back to the shared oven, how efficient it was in its own chaotic way. Villagers saved up all week for their turn. One firing, one inferno, many loaves. That made sense, economically, socially, thermodynamically. It was the medieval version of splitting the electric bill. Still, it's not like communal baking solves everything. People's doughs vary wildly. Some are underproofed and dense as roofing stones. Others turn out so fluffy they collapse under their own confidence. There's no standard, no temperature dial, no reliable bake time. Just the heat of the hearth, the gut instinct of the oven keeper, and a little prayer whispered when no one's looking. You nibble your loaf again, still warm but cooling fast. It's a good one this week. Last time the inside was raw. You had to toast slices over your hearth like some kind of peasant panini just to make it chewable. And don't even mention the time your crust caught fire. The embarrassment still lingers like soot. Historians still argue whether medieval baking skills were genuinely refined or if most loaves were barely edible. Some records describe perfectly risen white bread, others reference chunks so solid they could double as weapons. Maybe it depended on your flour or your enemies. Speaking of flour, sourcing it is another delightful challenge. You get it milled at the Lord's mill because you legally have to. He takes a cut, of course. If you dare to use a hand mill at home, say goodbye to your fingers, or at least your millstones. Mulcher, it's called. And yes, it sounds like vulture for a reason. Your flour isn't the soft, snowy stuff you dream about. It's gritty. There are bits in it. Tiny stones, bran husks, and the occasional questionable speck. Some say that's just how flour was. Others whisper that unscrupulous millers padded the mix to boost volume. You try not to think about it. On a shelf above your hearth sits your salt jar. It's half empty and you've been stretching it for weeks. Salt is expensive, really expensive. Imported, taxed, sometimes hoarded. A little sprinkle in the dough is a luxury. Too much, and you'll have to barter your best chicken feather quill just to restock. Water, at least, is free. Well, to sort of. You have to fetch it bucket by bucket from the village well, and you'd better get there early because once folks start washing, bathing, or Heaven help you, sheep rinsing, that water gets murky fast. You reflect briefly on how much effort goes into a single loaf. The wood, the flour, the salt, the water, the kneading, the resting, the mark you carve to avoid loaf theft. And then the actual baking, done under communal scrutiny and a heat level best described as inspired by volcanoes. And yet, this is bread, your lifeline. It's what fills your belly, feeds your children, and gives you the strength to survive another tax season. You eat it daily, sometimes 3 times a day. And when it runs out, you eat porridge, gruel, or nothing. You think of your neighbor's bread last week. It was grey, like actual grey. You didn't ask questions. Maybe she used barley. Maybe she added acorns. People get creative when hunger knocks. You head back outside, cradling your half-eaten loaf, and spot old Alfred sitting on a stump, sharpening a butter knife for no discernible reason. He gestures for a piece. You tear off. A chunk. Generosity is expected, especially when the loaf is fresh, and sit beside him. The two of you chew in comfortable silence, interrupted only by the occasional grunt of appreciation or a crumb-related cough. Alfred mutters, "Better than last week's," and you nod, swelling with pride. He doesn't compliment lightly. This man once called a bishop's feast serviceable. Suddenly you hear shouting near the oven. A small crowd's gathered again. You wander back toward the square, your crusty prize held tight. Turns out someone's loaf exploded. Yes, exploded. It happens. Trapped air, too much liquid, a rushed rise. It's a science, or possibly a witch's curse. The result? Bread carnage. Sticky dough across the oven walls, smoke pouring like a fog spell gone wrong. The smell's awful. Kind of like burned apples and regret. This isn't just a personal tragedy. It delays the whole baking queue. People grumble. The oven keeper sighs dramatically. Someone accuses the baker of sabotaging rival loaves. It's never dull here. You lean against a fence and watch the mess get scraped out. It's oddly soothing in the way that watching someone else clean always is. You glance at your remaining bread. Safe. Intact. Delicious. A soft breeze carries flour dust across the square. Somewhere a child is giggling, probably at the exploding loaf, and someone else is already planning next week's dough, maybe with herbs or cheese if the gods smile kindly. This is bread, yes. But it's also ritual, community, shared struggle, an edible bond between you and everyone else who's ever cursed a soggy bottom or risked a burnt crust. And as the sky clouds over and a gentle drizzle begins to fall, you smile. Because for now your oven woes are behind you. Until next baking day, at least. By now you've realized that baking bread in this village isn't just a household chore. It's a carefully controlled privilege, and no one guards that privilege more jealously than the baker. You shuffle through the damp grass again on a Thursday morning, loafless but observant because today isn't your bake day, it's the baker's. And that means the oven is off limits to common hands. The village baker, Master Alric, is preparing his own wares, and when Alric bakes, everyone else watches. You stand near the edge of the square as he moves with precision around the oven. His assistants, usually younger kin or wide-eyed apprentices, scurry around him with baskets of shaped dough and buckets of glaze. His loaves are bigger, fluffier, and more uniform than anyone else's in the village, and let's be honest, he knows it. Alric's family has held the baker's monopoly for 3 generations. It's not a trade you simply fall into. You inherit it, or bribe the reeve handsomely, or rumor has it, marry the miller's second cousin's daughter after a particularly well-timed dance at midsummer. Legally speaking, Alric has the right to operate the oven as a business on non-communal days. Villagers pay him in coin, goods, or services to bake for them, especially in winter months when wood is scarce. And kneading dough makes your hands ache like they've been cursed by a vengeful blacksmith. You watch as Alric tosses a handful of flour into the oven's mouth. Some say to test the heat, others whisper it's a charm to ward off underbaking. Either way, it looks impressive. Historians still argue whether bakers like Alric were respected or resented. Probably both. After all, he's necessary. The oven is his responsibility to maintain. He manages the fire, the fuel, the timing. If the dome cracks or the floor shifts, he's the one patching it up, or more often charging others for the repairs, but at the same time, he holds power, real, crumbly power. He knows who can't bake at home. He knows who's desperate for a loaf by Sunday. And worst of all, he knows everyone's taste in crust. Thin, thick, hard, chewy, sour, nothing is private. You edge closer as Alric slides out a batch of perfectly shaped loaves. The tops glisten. Some are sprinkled with herbs. One even has slivered almonds. You suck in a breath. Luxury loaves. These are not for the likes of you. These are for the reeve, the priest, and maybe the widow Marguerite, who always seems to have extra honey. Alric catches your eye, smirks, offers you a sample crumb, not big enough to chew, but just enough to trigger envy. You nod respectfully and chew it slowly. It's annoyingly perfect. He sells most of his loaves by mid-morning. A few are delivered on platters to the manor house. One is traded for wool. Another is swapped with the tavern keeper for a ceramic jug of very suspicious wine. The village functions like this. Half barter, half mutual blackmail. You remember a time not long ago when a woman named Beata tried to start baking at home. Just little flatbreads, nothing ambitious. She got away with it for 3 weeks before Alric happened to mention it to the reeve. Beata's thatch mysteriously caught fire the next evening. No one proved anything, but she hasn't baked since. This is Alric's domain, make no mistake, and he's not above using scorched crusts or smoky ovens as leverage. Want your special holiday loaf to come out just right? Best bring him a small gift, a bit of sausage, a ribbon, news from the market road. That's how things work here. Still, it's not all smug, flour-dusted tyranny. Alric once caught a child trying to swap a burnt loaf for a better one, and instead of a scolding, he slipped the child a fresh bun and sent him running. He has rules, yes, but he's not heartless, just calculated. You think about that as you wander past the oven again, now empty and cooling. The ash has settled. The scent of baked bread lingers in the air like a ghost. One of Alric's apprentices sweeps the hearth floor, humming something tuneless and soft. Behind the oven there's a small shed, Alric's private baking space. Inside he keeps records, notes on who paid, who didn't, who kneads too wet, who salts too heavy, who tried to pass off borrowed flour as their own. You've never seen it, of course, but the rumors are vivid. One popular tale says Alric once recorded a feud between 2 women, Agnes and Brunner, over a swapped rye loaf. He allegedly logged the precise hour, witness names, and how many tears were shed. People still argue about whether he invented the drama to boost his status, but it's become a favorite fireside story nonetheless. And that's the thing about bakers in this time. They're not just cooks. They're chroniclers, power brokers, low-key detectives of domestic scandal. You head home again, still thinking about those perfect loaves. You'd never admit it, but you kind of want to apprentice under Alric. Learn the heat, the dough, the mystery of how he gets his crusts to sing. But then you remember he makes you call him Master Alric, and the feeling passes. Still, as the sun sets and a chill drifts through the village lanes, you look back toward the oven's stone dome, now grey and resting. A little smoke rises like a sigh. The heart of the village, baking its slow, crusty heartbeat, one loaf and one secret at a time. You wake early the next day, the sun barely peeking over the thatched rooftops and your stomach already rumbling. Not just because you skipped dinner, again, but because bread isn't just food, it's your status. And today, you're reminded that every crumb says something about you. You glance at what remains of your loaf, half a heel, tough, dense. You chew it anyway, eyes darting out the door in case the dogs are circling again. Last week, they made off with your neighbor's trencher, bowl, an edible plate basically, and left him licking stew from his own palm. Humbling. Your bread? It's coarse, brownish grey, clearly lower tier. It shouts peasant with each bite. That's because you're using rye flour, maybe a little barley if you've bartered well, and if you're lucky, a pinch of oat. All solid, humble grains. And absolutely not prestigious ones. Now if you were rich, like manor rich, you'd eat white bread. The soft, fluffy, almost cake-like kind. Made from fine, sifted wheat flour called manche. Expensive, time-consuming. So pale it nearly glows, that's the bread of the elite. If you carried that around, people would bow, or try to rob you. You remember last week's feast day. The reeve walked past with a small manchet loaf perched. like a trophy in a linen cloth. Everyone stared. No one commented. But you could feel the jealousy ripple through the crowd like bad stew through a weak stomach. Historians still argue whether white bread was genuinely better or just a symbol of privilege. It certainly tasted different, lighter, sweeter, but nutritionally. Your grainy, bran-flecked slab might actually be better for your bowels. Still, try telling that to someone with a flour-sifted ego. Then there's the matter of how you eat. Bread isn't just a meal, it's a tool. In wealthier homes, it's the plate itself. A trencher of firm bread is laid down, stew poured over it, meat torn and rested on top. By the end of the meal, the soaked trencher is either eaten or, if you're feeling pious, given to the poor. Spoiler alert, the poor don't always want it. It's soggy, like licking yesterday's news. You walk toward the oven square again, just to see who's baking today. There's always someone. You see Widow Joan kneeling near the fire, her back arched, placing something wrapped in cabbage leaves near the coals. Pie, maybe. She's always inventive. You nod at her and pass by, loafless, but not unnoticed. Because here's the thing. Everyone notices everyone's bread. They see what you carry. They remember what you traded for flour. They see if you have honey, or herbs, or cheese bits. They see if you burned it, if you let it go moldy. If your kids eat crusts or just gnaw the soft centers, it's like carrying your resume in your lunch bag. You remember the time you were sick and your neighbor baked your dough for you. She mixed up the salt and sugar, gave you a dessert loaf that confused the entire village, took you a month to live it down. Someone still calls you sweetbread when you pass. You sigh and walk past the smithy, where he's gnawing on something that could be a rock or a roll. Hard to tell. Blackened crust, no steam, definitely overbaked. You wince in sympathy. Bread isn't just sustenance here. It's your economic ID. You trade it. You owe it. Sometimes it owes you. People pay rent in loaves, tithes, fines. A local friar once accepted 7 loaves for moral forgiveness, though everyone agreed he just liked crusty ends. You sit near the oven where the fire has been recently stoked. Warmth kisses your knees. The smell is incredible. It always is. Yeasty, toasty, slightly smoky. Someone's baking with rosemary today. Show off. And now comes the quiet flex. A young girl walks past with a cloth bundle and very obvious white flour dusting her fingers. You pretend not to see, but everyone sees. It means someone in her family has friends in the manor kitchen, or coin, or a secret favor owed. There's a quiet moment where everyone stops and watches, just for a second. Then conversation resumes. But the message has been sent. We had white bread this week. What did you have? You chuckle to yourself, because while bread shows status, it also invites sabotage. People swap loaves accidentally. They tamper with rising dough. They poke small holes into someone else's crust, so it collapses mid-bake. One time someone hid a pebble inside a rival's round, cracked their tooth on market day. You heard the Reeve laugh. These aren't hardened criminals. They're your neighbors. But bread is life, and life's got claws when food is scarce, and pride is on the line. You get up, dust yourself off, and head toward the market to see if any barley traders are in town. Maybe you'll splurge this week, maybe sneak in an egg, or a sliver of cheese. You imagine it now, cheese baked into the dough, melting slightly, salty and rich. If it works, your name might rise like yeast in the village rumor mill. If it burns, well, there's always stew. As you walk, the wind picks up, scattering flour from someone's apron into the air like snow. You breathe it in. A little gritty, but warm, comforting. 1,000 years from now, people might forget your name. But the bread you baked, that smell, that pride, that stays. Right here in the crust. You're back in the queue again, standing behind a woman who smells faintly of onions and determination. It's baking day for your lane, which means the oven is in full swing, the fire is roaring, and the air is so thick with flour and smoke that you can taste it just by opening your mouth. You glance around. Everyone's clutching their dough like a treasure, wrapped in linen, nestled in baskets or wooden trays. There's always a strange blend of pride and fear on baking day. Pride that your dough is ready, fear that it might collapse, crack, or, worst, fate of all gets swapped. Welcome to Communal Baking Day, the single most passive-aggressively dramatic event in the medieval village calendar. Each neighborhood gets a turn. Today it's yours. The entire community's been prepping since yesterday, soaking grains, drying yeast, gossiping about flour quality. There's a system, sort of. First come, first baked. But there's also the unspoken ranking. Who the oven keeper likes best, who brought her a smoked herring last feast day, and who accidentally insulted her embroidery last week. You eye the oven keeper, a sturdy woman named Sabina, with arms like twisted rope and a stare that can turn warm dough cold. You nod. She doesn't nod back. Not a great omen. You inch forward, cradling your own round loaf, scored with your family's mark, a crude leaf pattern you carved with a chicken bone. It's risen well this time. You used the last of your good flour, even borrowed some wild fennel from the priest's garden. A risk, but worth it if it impresses Sabina, or at least doesn't make her roll her eyes. Everyone's watching everyone. It's an unofficial competition masked as a cooperative task. You pretend not to judge, but you notice Alice's loaf is sagging on one side, and Tom's dough has that too wet look, like it might flatten into a pancake the moment it hits the stone. Historians still argue whether communal baking days brought people together or subtly tore them apart. Maybe it was both. On the surface there's harmony, sharing fire, splitting shifts, exchanging tips. Underneath, oh, the pettiness. Loaf envy is real. And loaf revenge? Even realer. You remember last spring when John the shepherd mixed ground beans into his dough to stretch it, but forgot they'd turn the crust an unnatural shade of green. No one said anything, out loud. But for months, people would sniff the air dramatically when he walked by. Poor man nearly gave up baking altogether. Back in the queue, the oven door yawns open, revealing a floor of glowing bricks and an aroma that could charm coins out of a miser's purse. The shovels are ready. The coals hiss faintly. Sabina gestures, and the baking begins. Loaf after loaf goes in, each slid expertly with a flat wooden paddle. Names are murmured, marks double-checked. There's a rhythm to it. Flour, shovel, swish, heat, and then you step up, breath held. You offer your dough like a peace treaty. Sabina inspects it, lifts an eyebrow. It's scored too deep. She mutters, but she slides it in anyway. Relief and shame wash over you in equal measure. You shuffle to the sidelines where others already wait, some sitting on low stools, others standing with arms crossed. You see Agnes whispering to Joan, definitely about someone's lumpy crust, possibly yours. There's nothing to do now but wait. And while you wait, you watch the play unfold. A woman pretends not to notice her loaf collapsing. A boy tries to sneak a peek inside the oven and gets whacked gently with a cloth. Someone's goat wanders into the square, sniffs a sack of barley, and is chased away with a shout. Meanwhile, two men argue quietly over baking order. One insists he arrived before dawn. The other claims he saw him sleepwalking home last night. You lean back against a post and let the warmth from the oven drift toward you like a sleepy embrace. The square is alive with flour-dusted noise. Crackling fire, murmured gossip, the occasional bark of laughter. Then comes the smell shift. Everyone knows it. That perfect moment when the first crusts begin to brown, a toasty, nutty perfume that wraps around your head like a woolen scarf. People inhale. Sabina squints into the flames. First batch is ready. She starts pulling them out, one by one. The crowd tenses. Heads crane. Whose loaf is that? Did it hold its shape? Is that someone's cheese bubbling out the side? One is burnt. Sabina announces it loudly. Whose was the tall one with too much barley? A man slinks forward, red-faced. The loaf is returned, blackened but intact. Everyone pretends not to smirk, except Alice. Alice definitely smirks. Then, yours appears. It's golden. The crust split just right. Fennel seeds glisten faintly. Sabina raises it, pauses, nods once, and places it beside the others. No comment. Which in Sabina speak is high praise. You let out a breath you didn't realize you were holding. This loaf will feed you well for 3 days if you don't brag too hard. Maybe even trade a slice for a ribbon or a secret. That's another part of this ritual. What happens after the baking? The loaf is currency, a way to say thank you. I'm sorry, I heard a rumor. The right piece of bread given at the right time can open doors, close mouths, win hearts, or at the very least guarantee you a spot in next week's baking queue. And as the final loaves emerge from the oven, steam spiraling into the cool. Ere you gather yours in both hands, savoring the warmth, the pride, the survival. Because on communal baking day, you don't just earn bread, you earn your place. You make it back home, warm loaf in hand, fingers dusted with flour and pride. But before you can even take a bite, you notice something's off. Not the crust, it's perfect. Not the smell, divine. But the mark on the top isn't yours. You are. Squint. Your family mark, the simple crossed sprigs, has been replaced with a flower-shaped stamp. Too neat, too floral. Your heart sinks faster than an underproofed rye. This isn't your loaf. This is Margaret's, she of the rose stamp, she of the overly sweet crust and passive-aggressive smiles. Somehow your bread, your perfect fennel-dotted masterpiece, has been swapped. Whether by accident or calculated loaf thievery, the result is the same. Betrayal, sugar, and a bite of someone else's week. You sit down hard on your stool, resisting the urge to throw the imposter loaf out the window. You chew it slowly, the hint of honey nearly mocking you. It's fine, good even. But it's not yours. It's not what you needed with your own cracked hands. This is why you mark your dough. Back in the square, each baker scores, slices, or stamps their loaves before baking. That's the only way to tell whose is whose once they're pulled out of the communal oven. Without it, every golden round would look the same, and chaos would rule. You remember your mark as a child. Your mother taught you to carve it just before handing over the dough using a little stick or even your thumb. Everyone had their symbol, a leaf, a cross, a swirl, initials, or in one memorable case, a tiny cat face. Historians still argue whether these marks began as necessity or evolved into art forms. In some towns, intricate patterns became signatures of prestige. In others, a quick slash was enough to stake your claim. Either way, they mattered. And yet, swaps still happened. Accidental ones, sure. The oven gets crowded. Crusts crack, marks blur, flour smears. But sometimes, not so accidental. Like when Edith's walnut-stuffed loaf mysteriously found its way into Alice's basket 3 weeks ago. Edith wept. Alice blamed heat confusion. The village hasn't forgotten. You've seen worse, though. Once a loaf was stolen mid-bake. Removed too early. Half done, still pale, then hastily hidden in a sack. It was later found in the goat pen, half eaten, suspiciously chewy, and with someone's mark suspiciously scraped off. No one confessed. Everyone knew. You take another. Bite of Margaret's loaf. It's cloying. Too much honey. Maybe a pinch of cinnamon. You try not to grimace, but the flavor clings to your tongue like a lesson learned too late. You think back to last spring, when your cousin tried to create a new mark. Her fancy one, with swirling lines and dots like some kind of culinary tapestry. The oven-keeper squinted at it, tilted her head, and declared it either a hedgehog or a disaster. Needless to say, it didn't catch on. Still, people try to be clever. Some soak their marks in oil before baking, hoping for a clearer imprint. Others press dried herbs into the top, though these tend to burn and crumble, leaving behind mysterious black smudges. One man carved an entire family tree into his crust. It looked stunning. It tasted like soot. You rinse your hands and glance at your baking cloth, still neatly folded by the hearth. That cloth, the very one you wrapped your dough in, is supposed to safeguard your loaf. But even that system isn't perfect. Sometimes people switch the dough before the bake, wrapping theirs in a fancier cloth, hoping for a better baking. Slot, a scandalous maneuver. You once heard of a village 3 valleys over, where a woman embroidered her cloth with her initials and a warning, "Not yours." Apparently that didn't stop anyone. The thief just took the cloth too. You shake your head and sigh. Bread swapping is as old as the oven itself. Some say it began out of desperation, others out of ambition, and occasionally, pure mischief. A loaf-swapping prank once spiraled into a week-long feud involving flour sabotage, loud public accusations, and someone throwing a pickle into a wedding feast. No one remembers who won, but the pickle is still discussed. You pick up the rogue, loaf and walk to the window. Margaret's house is just across the lane. You could knock, hand it back, ask for yours. But then you remember last month she borrowed your butter crock and returned it suspiciously empty. Perhaps this is fate's correction. Instead, you carve your mark deeper into your new baking stick. You'll make it more obvious next week. Bold, unmistakable. Maybe even outline it with beet juice for contrast. Because in a world where bread is baked publicly and hunger hovers just a missed bake away, there's no room for ambiguity. You chew another slice, still too sweet. Still not yours, but strangely satisfying all the same. You settle by the hearth and imagine next week's dough. New flour, a sprinkle of seeds. A crust so defined it could be seen from the moon, if medieval people knew what that was. And next time, no swaps. No soft marks, no sugar-laced deceptions. Just your bread, your name, and your place in the line. You're back in the square again, sitting on your usual low stool, one leg shorter than the others, nursing a mug of something warm, possibly tea, possibly soup, possibly just hot water with ambition. Your bread is safely cooling beside you. Your mark perfectly intact this time, carved like a defiant middle finger to the loaf snatchers of the world. You didn't come just to bake today. You came to linger, because while the oven is the heart of the village, it's also its mouth, and its ears, and its slightly judgmental eyebrow. It's where you come not just to feed your body, but to feed your hunger for news, scandal, laughter, and the slow burn of shared silence. As the flames crackle and loaves rise inside, the villagers gather around the oven like moths drawn to something warmer than fire. You're not the only one. There's old Rafe sharpening a stick for no discernible reason, two sisters arguing in low voices over whose turn it is to fetch water, a boy chasing a chicken in a circle so relentless. You wonder if the chicken has developed strategy. The oven, still radiating heat from the latest batch, isn't just a place to cook. It's the medieval town square, and today it's buzzing. Did you hear about the Reeves' daughter, someone whispers. You don't even have to ask. You tilt your head slightly and the whisper continues. She was seen talking to a tinker, by the river, without her head covering. Gasps, muted laughter. One person crosses themselves. The conversation swells around you like soup bubbling in a shared pot. This is the beauty of the oven. Its heat draws out the truth. Or at least the version of truth people find most entertaining. Historians still argue whether medieval gossip was functional or frivolous. Was it community policing, social glue, or just human nature, rising like dough in the presence of warm distractions? Whatever the cause, here around the oven, stories flow freely. You contribute when you can. Nothing major, just a comment about how Edith's bread seems awfully white for someone who swears she can't afford wheat. You don't name names, just raise an eyebrow. Someone snorts. Someone else says, she's got connections with the manor kitchen. Someone else mumbles, or with the manor cook. Laughter rolls through the square like a pleasant fog. You shift your weight and listen as children weave between legs, pretending the oven is a dragon's cave. One girl with twigs in her hair guards it solemnly with a stick, demanding payment. In pebbles, she's collected 9 so far. One of them may be a very small potato. Meanwhile, 3 older men sit cross-legged near the fire, arguing about the correct way to keep the oven bricks from cracking in the frost. One swears by damp moss, another says cold ash. The third insists that if you bake nothing but onion loaves in the winter, the moisture keeps the walls stable. This is not, to your knowledge, remotely scientific. But it's being said with the confidence of someone who hasn't been contradicted in years. You lean back, feet stretched toward the radiant heat, and breathe in the scents. Rosemary ash sweat, a hint of roasted turnip someone snuck in beside the loaves. The conversation turns naturally to the priest. He says we shouldn't bake on saints' days, mutters one woman, stuffing her knitting into a bag. Easy for him to say, another huffs. He's got barley wafers coming out his ears. Does he even eat real bread? Someone wonders. Only the body of Christ, someone mutters, and you all try not to laugh too loud. Just in case. This is what makes the oven so magical. Not the bread, though the bread is pretty great, but the togetherness. You're all here for the same reason. Yet you all carry different stories, fears, petty grudges, and inside jokes. And around the fire it all warms evenly. You hear footsteps and someone announces that a traveler has arrived, someone from 2 towns over, carrying dried apples and questionable tales. You perk up. News stories are oven gold. This one's got a limp, a lute, and a bag of hardtack he calls journey bread. You're not convinced it's edible. He tells a story about a town with 2 ovens. 2. One for the nobles, one for everyone else. You feel a pang of envy, quickly drowned by the comfort of your own oven's familiar smoke. He also mentions a village where people bake in pits, dug straight into the ground, lined with hot stones, dough wrapped in leaves. Half. The crowd pretends to be appalled. The other half clearly wants to try it next feast day. The kids swarm him, asking for songs, riddles, and whether his limp came from fighting a dragon. He obliges with a tune about a pig who stole bread and got cursed with indigestion. You hum along even though the melody is clearly stolen from a funeral chant. You look around. The gossip has slowed, the laughter softened. People lean closer to the oven now, lulled by the warmth, the rhythm, the shared stories baked into every stone. Your loaf rests nearby, wrapped and cooling, but no one's in a rush. This is part of the ritual too. You stretch your legs. Your foot knocks a stone. Someone grumbles, you apologize. Someone else tells a joke about monks and misbaked loaves that isn't very funny, but you all laugh anyway. Because here, around the oven, everything rises eventually. You've seen it now, haven't you? The oven isn't just a furnace for dough. It's a furnace for everything else too. Secrets, scandals, social rules, the kind that aren't written down, but might get you toasted just the same. You return. The next morning, not to bake, but to watch. The fire's not even lit yet. The square is quiet, the dew still clinging to the grass. You settle near the stones and wait, and soon enough the procession begins. First comes Mother Ellen, cloth-wrapped bundle in hand, humming like she owns the place. Which, socially speaking, she kind of does. Her daughter married the Reeves, brother, and no one forgets that kind of thing. She gets her loaves in early, always. You suspect there's bribery involved, possibly pickled fish. Then Tom stumbles in, eyes half closed, clearly suffering from a night of bad ale or bad decisions. Maybe both. He plops down, groans, and unwraps a loaf that's, well, it looks like a pillow someone sat on. No one says anything. Yet. You watch the tension rise slowly, like dough left too long near the fire. There's a rhythm here. People arrive, eye each other, calculate alliances. Old arguments flicker to life. New judgments form instantly. Even the way someone places their dough on the prep bench says something. Historians still argue whether this behavior was organic or ritualized, but one thing's clear. Communal baking wasn't just about sharing, it was about surveillance. You spot 2 women pretending not to glance at each other's baskets. One has fine linen. The other's cloth is patched and soot-stained. The difference is louder than words. They don't speak, they don't need to. And then comes your favorite part. The passive-aggressive recipe comparisons. I used a touch of lavender this week, says one. Oh, I find that clashes with barley, replies another, smiling just a bit too sweetly. A man leans in, asking what flour they used. The conversation derails into an argument about which miller is least likely to cheat you with sawdust. It's a ballet of humble brag and subtle insult. You shift slightly and glance toward the oven keeper. Today it's Elric, a wiry man with soot tattoos on both arms and a way of sniffing dough like he can tell your intentions from the scent. He runs a tight operation. He lets in loaves with the precision of a jeweler. You watch him deny one. 2. Sticky, he says simply. The woman nods, humiliated. Everyone saw she'll have to go home, rest it longer, risk missing her slot. You make a mental note, always check for overhydration. Around the edges of the group, people whisper. Not about dough anymore. Now it's social matters. One man leans against a cart, murmuring that the new priest has unusually clean boots. Suspiciously clean. Could mean he's not from around here, or that he doesn't walk anywhere. Either way, people are watching. That's the thing about this oven. It sees everything. It witnesses your ingredients, your timing, your tone. And everyone else does too. You bake under an audience. You rise or collapse under their gaze. You once saw a woman wait until no one was looking. then subtly nudge her loaf half an inch forward. Closer to the center, closer to that sweet, even heat. It was a brilliant move until someone called her out, loudly. "I think your loaf's eager today," they'd said. And just like that, her crust became a village punchline for a month. Another time a man tried to forget his bake day and squeeze into someone else's. "Just one loaf," he said. Sabina, the previous oven keeper, had stared at him so long he actually apologized to the fire. That's the power here. Not firewood, not flour, social pressure. You glance down the line and spot two teenage girls giggling behind their sleeves. One of them gestures toward a boy holding a misshapen lump that could be dough or a failed experiment. The other whispers something that ends in snorting. The boy notices, flushes, drops his dough, steps on it. Everyone pretends not to notice, loudly. Still, despite the drama, the oven is oddly comforting. Familiar, the rituals never change. The same jabs, the same rules, the same unspoken truths. Show up on time, mark your dough, don't rush the heat, don't cheat the cue, and for heaven's sake, don't lie about your yeast, because, oh, there's yeast drama too. Some swear by dry scrapings passed down from ancestors. Others use fresh brews from the tavern sludge. There was a trend last summer, brief but memorable, of using wildflower pollen as a starter. The loaves turned purple. One man claimed it was intentional. No one believed him. You stand and stretch, your knees crackling like a thatch roof in winter. Your neighbor waves, you wave back. Yesterday you were loaf rivals. Today, just two people warming your backsides near the same fire. Because this is the oven's other gift, bonding through bickering. It forces you together. You can't run off and bake alone. You can't pretend no one saw your crust collapse. You have to stand there red-faced with your bread baby drooping like a deflated bladder, and the person beside you has to pretend not to laugh, or, if they're kind, laugh with you. You remember once, years ago, when your loaf was so bad that even the oven refused it. The keeper just stared and said, "Try again next week and maybe pray harder." You'd been humiliated, but then an old woman you barely knew had sidled up, handed you a chunk of her own loaf and said, "Try this. Rye and vinegar. Helps. With swelling." She winked and you still have no idea what she meant. That's the oven. Brutal but forgiving, public but somehow private, a place where shame and joy rise together, where revenge is served hot and crusty, and where your whole world can turn on the shape of a loaf. You wake to smoke in your nostrils, not the dangerous flee-the-hut kind, but the comforting, faintly bitter scent of something just slightly overbaked. It clings to the air like an old friend. Outside, the sky is grey with low clouds, and there's a drizzle that makes everything slightly sticky. Perfect baking weather. Assuming, of course, that someone doesn't mess it all up again. You make your way to the oven square. It's half empty today. A smaller baking group scheduled. Just your side of the village and a few from the outer huts. You like these quieter sessions. Less pressure, fewer judges, slightly lower chance of someone calling your loaf miserably, pale in public. As you approach the oven, you notice the board nailed to a leaning post beside it. The list. Not a schedule, not exactly, more like a collective memory carved in chalk. It's got names, baking slots, warnings, and in one corner a doodle of a pig eating a loaf. That's been there for years. No one knows who drew it. No one dares erase it. But today you spot something new on the list. Marjorie's disaster twice. You snort. It's written in all caps, underlined, and someone's drawn two tiny steaming loaves beside it, both visibly collapsed. Everyone's heard about it by now. Last week, Marjorie tried to bake a sweet dough with too much butter, forgot to flour the base and loaded it in before the oven was ready. The result, sticky, scorched chaos. Half her dough slid off the shovel. The other half welded itself to the hearth floor like a medieval pancake from hell. The oven had to be scraped clean with a spade. Elric, the oven keeper, had not been amused. "You'll be on the board," he'd said, and now she was. Twice. This is how fines work here. Not always in coin, not even always official. Sometimes the punishment is just being remembered, memorialized in soot and chalk, a social scar that will take at least 3 perfect loaves to scrub away. You lean in closer. Below Marjorie's name, another note. Do not use dripping as grease. Again. It doesn't say who that one's for. But you have a few guesses. Historians still argue whether these communal boards were formal governance or informal folklore. Honestly, here it's both. The oven has rules, written ones sometimes, often posted on old bits of board or announced loudly by whoever currently runs the show. But more powerful than the rules are the stories. You remember a summer when someone tried to bake a rabbit pie during bread day. Not with permission, just slid it in sneakily beside the loaves. The smell gave it away instantly. Savory, meaty, herby betrayal. The punishment, no bake slot for a month. And someone added pie guy to the board in crooked letters. It stayed for a year. And then there are the real fines. Late dough? You might be bumped to the end of the line. Soggy bottom? Not technically punishable, but expect Snickers. Burned crust that sets off smoke alarms if smoke alarms had existed. That'll cost you. Elric once made a man trade his best turnip for cleanup duty. The man still hasn't looked anyone in. The eye since one time, a woman baked during a fasting day. Unknowingly, she claimed. The priest declared it a sin. The oven was shut down for an entire afternoon, and no one forgave her until she brought a honey loaf the next week. Bribery or redemption? Depends on who you ask. You spot your friend Mikkel crouched near the board, chalk in hand, squinting. Adding a new line, you ask? He shakes his head. Just underlining Marjorie's name. You chuckle. She'll never live it down, he adds. She'll probably bake a masterpiece next week, you say. She'd better, he replies, or she's getting her own corner. The rain lets up and people begin to arrive. Smaller group today, yes, but no less competitive. You hear one woman muttering about another's suspiciously plump dough. Someone else is clearly carrying too many loaves, technically allowed, but frowned upon. And then, from behind the oven, a voice shouts, "Whose dough is leaking?" Everyone stops. You glance toward the fire. There it is, a telltale dribble sliding slowly across the hearthstone, bubbling ominously. The oven keeper lifts a baking paddle and hoists the offending loaf out. It's oozing from one side, sticky, with something jam-like. "Is this plum?" he asks. No one answers. He sniffs it. "Plum and mint?" Still silence. Then Marjorie steps forward, red-faced. It was meant to be a surprise, it is, just not the kind anyone wanted. The oven keeper sighs, gently but firmly scrapes the mess away and mutters, "3 disasters. You're getting your own section." Someone adds a tiny plum next to her name on the board. You feel bad for her, a little, but you also mentally rehearse your own ingredients for next week. Nothing exotic, no leaks. Just good, reliable dough, because here every mistake is witnessed. Every loaf is an announcement. And if you make one too many errors, the oven doesn't forget. The list doesn't forget. And the village? Oh, they'll never let you forget. Today, you're not baking. Today, you're just walking. No dough in hand, no cloth-covered bundle tucked under your arm. But you still find yourself drifting toward the oven as though gravity pulls you there. And maybe it does. Because in this village, all paths eventually lead to the hearth. Except today, something's different. A wooden post stands just beside the oven, freshly painted with the crest of the manor. A scroll is tacked to it with heavy wax. You squint. At the cramped Latin and then, mercifully, at the translated note beneath it, by order of the Lord. Baking forbidden on fast days and holy eves, under penalty of fine and forfeiture. Church-sanctioned loaves only. You sigh, you knew this was coming. The church and the manor have been slowly tightening their grip on even the smallest aspects of village life. And now? Now they want your bread, literally. This isn't just about religious observance. It's about control. Because bread means life, and whoever dictates how and when it's baked, eaten, blessed, or taxed, well, that person practically owns your lungs. You sit on the edge of the square watching people gather to read the notice. The reactions vary. Some scoff, some look nervous. One woman whispers that her husband eats before dawn on fast days, just to spite the rules. Another mutters, "Next they'll tell us what dreams we can have." You've already been feeling the creeping influence of both church and Lord in your dough. That barley tax last month, tripled. The manor's guard demanding a bread fee in exchange for access to the communal oven after sundown. That happened. And now this historians still argue whether medieval bread laws were meant to preserve sanctity or simply enforce hierarchy? You suspect both. It's always both. You remember when Father Elias gave a sermon about gluttony and pointedly mentioned luxury crusts. Everyone looked at you, just because you'd experimented with egg wash. Once. But it's not just the sermons. The church literally blesses bread. Loaves baked for saints' days are sprinkled with holy water. Easter breads get decorated with crosses. You're allowed to bake holy bread, but only if approved, only if plain, only if properly. Dry bread is a divine virtue, as if heaven frowns upon anything spongy. Meanwhile, the manor insists on lordly rights. If you bake with fine flour, a portion may be claimed by the reeve. You once saw him take an entire half-loaf, supposedly for testing. He tested it straight into his mouth. You rise and wander behind the oven, where there's a little box marked, "For tithes." Inside are a few coins, a bruised apple, and a neatly wrapped biscuit. Someone's trying to win favor. You hear someone behind you mutter, "They'll want us fasting on Tuesdays next. No meat, no bread, just boiled sadness." Another voice chimes in. "The abbot in Kirkford banned sweetbread, said sugar stirs impure thoughts." "Good thing none of us can afford sugar," someone replies, dry as old toast. And yet, despite all this, people obey, or pretend to. You recall a feast day when no one officially baked, but the oven still smoked by dawn. A few accidental loaves appeared on tables by evening. "Oh, it was from yesterday," people insisted, faces blank, eyes gleaming. Even the priest had a nibble. You walk past the church and glance in through the open door. There's a basket of wafers, thin, holy, flavorless, bread made spiritual by subtraction. You sit on a bench and think about how strange it is, how the same food that nourishes your stomach must also feed your soul in regulation-approved portions. Even the shape of your bread might fall under scrutiny. Round loaves are fine. Cross-marked loaves, good. Loaves shaped like animals for harvest festivals, frowned upon. Bread with cheese inside, dangerous territory. You once heard about a woman in another village who baked a loaf shaped like a swan. The priest said it was prideful. The Lord said it was unrealistic. She said nothing and moved to a new village where her bread could be as bird-like as she pleased. But you get it. Bread isn't just nourishment, it's symbolism, power, identity. So when the church says, "No bread on this day," they're not just talking about dough. They're telling you when to celebrate, when to mourn, when to feel shame. And when the Lord says, "This flour is mine," he's not just taking grain. He's reminding you whose oven you truly bake in. You watch as two boys chase each other with sticks, laughing, dodging near the hearthstones. One of them calls the other priest crust. You don't even know what it means, but it sounds insulting. Nearby, a woman mutters that she's going to bake anyway, but make it thin so it doesn't count. A man laughs. "Like your husband," he says. The group howls. Even the oven creaks as if amused. So you realize something. You can make all the laws you want. You can fine, threaten, shame. But bread will find a way. Because it's not just a rule-bound thing, it's the smell that wakes you. The crust that tells you someone cares. The crumb that fills your belly when everything else is gone. It's resistance, needed daily. And today, maybe you won't bake. But tomorrow? Oh, tomorrow you will, even if it's with old flour, even if it's thin, even if you have to call it communion to get away with it. You crouch near the fire, poking it gently with a stick, watching the embers shift like sleeping dragons. The oven hasn't been lit yet today, still cool to the touch, but the square is already alive with voices. Cloth bundles, dough bowls, and old arguments arrive before the kindling does, and there, as always, are the women. You sit back on your heels and take it in. It's easy to assume the men run the baking, especially if you only glance at the person shoveling loaves or tending the fire. But if you look closer, if you listen, you'll hear the truth whispered between strokes of flour-dusted hands and quiet nods over rising dough. This whole operation, it runs on women. From the moment flour hits water, women rule the rhythm. They know the ratios by memory, not measure. They can knead with one hand while bouncing a baby with the other. They can slap sense into both bread and misbehaving husbands, often in the same hour. Take Marga, for example. Mid-40s, eyes like storm clouds, and kneading arms you wouldn't want to argue with. Her loaves are never burnt. Her marks are bold. and her opinion on your hydration ratio is loud. She's the reason the oven floor hasn't collapsed, and the reason 3 marriages have next to her there's Ellie. Younger, quieter. But watch how the other women shift when she says, maybe more rye. They listen. She's the one experimenting, with roasted onion and ash glaze. Her bread looks like something from a royal kitchen, but she still lets children snack on the ends. Equal parts ambition and mercy. You remember your own mother at the hearth, sleeves rolled, hair tied back, forehead shining with effort and pride. She taught you to listen to the dough, like it spoke its own secret language. And she was right. Dough tells you when it's happy, when it's tired, when it needs more flour, or when it's being stubborn on purpose. Historians still argue how much authority medieval women had in baking culture. But here, you don't need a parchment to see the truth. Women are the baking culture. They teach it, guard it, share it grudgingly. They whisper tricks to those they trust. How to keep dough soft in winter. How to mimic wheat using barley and hope. How to salvage a collapsed loaf by calling it flatbread with confidence. You once saw 3 women hold an impromptu tribunal. When a man brought dough that was too sticky, they surrounded him like hawks, poked it, sniffed it, clucked their tongues. One finally declared, "It needs rest," and walked away. The man nodded, as though he'd just been handed a holy blessing. You scoot closer to the oven, watching the first sparks catch. Her girl nearby fans the kindling, while her mother wraps the dough in damp cloth. It's a ritual, almost holy. And while the priest might insist that bread belongs on the altar, the real sanctity happens right here, beneath smoke and laughter, and the occasional shouted correction. And there's something else happening here, something deeper than yeast rising or flour stretching. There's resistance, because for all the control the church and the Lord try to exert, there's a rebellion in these hearths, in these women's hands. When you're told you can't bake on saints' days, they bake thinner loaves and call them offerings. When the tax collector demands a portion, they swap the fancy flour into secret cloth sacks and present him the coarse batch. He never notices. When a man gets too proud of his perfect loaf, they quietly swap it with one of theirs, just to see him panic. You remember last month when a woman, Alba, was forbidden to bake because she'd spoken too loudly at a council meeting. She didn't argue. She just gave her dough to 5 different friends. They baked it for her, all, under different names. Her bread was still served. The system blinked. The women smiled. There's power in this oven. But there's more in those hands. You walk around the square and hear them talk. Not about flour or salt, but about everything else. Marriages, illness, a new baby, a missing hen, one woman's son, off to serve a lord far away, another's daughter betrothed to a miller she doesn't like. These aren't side conversations, they're the center. The real work, kneaded between finger joints and rising dough. And sometimes, they whisper things that aren't supposed to be said aloud. You pass by 2 women laughing quietly behind their cloth-wrapped loaves. You hear snippets. Did you hear what he said to the steward? Right in front of the barley sacks? He'll never sit on a cart again, I swear. The rest is lost in the roar of the oven catching fire, flames blooming like petals. There's laughter now, loud, unapologetic. These women have seen death, drought, taxes, and childbirth. They've buried children and outlived 3 husbands. They've carried sacks of grain and secrets equally heavy. And yet they laugh, and that laughter, it's stronger than law. You head back to your loaf, just starting its second rise, tucked beside the oven's edge. One of the women passes by and glances at it. Too tight, she says. You open your mouth to argue, then close it. She's probably right. You adjust it slightly. She nods. No praise. Just the nod. You'll take it. Because round here approval comes softly, like steam, like heat, like bread rising just beneath the surface. It begins with a smell, sharp, bitter, and wrong. You're halfway through feeding the chickens when the breeze shifts and hits you full in the face. Not the comforting scent of wood smoke and rye you've come to expect. No, this is acrid, charred. Something between burning hair and scorched stew. You drop the feed sack and run. Others are already emerging from their homes, heads tilted, noses twitching. The square ahead is hazy. The oven. Something's happened. By the time you arrive, the sky above the square is veiled in a thick plume of grey smoke. Embers dance like fireflies in panic, and the crowd is gathering in a stunned, half-dressed, breadless huddle. The oven is burning, or rather, has burned. What's left is smoking rubble, the dome cracked through like a dropped egg. A pile of charred timber slouches. Beside it, the woodpile gone. The inside glows faintly, but the fire's already run its course. And standing in the middle of it all is Elric the oven keeper, covered in soot, holding what looks like half a loaf in one trembling hand. You stare in silence. Someone coughs. Someone else mutters a prayer. The birds above are circling. It's strangely quiet, aside from the occasional hiss of cooling stone. What happened? Someone finally whispers. Elric looks up, eyes rimmed with ash, and mutters, "It jumped," which is not helpful or believable. Historians still argue what caused medieval oven fires. Faulty construction, misplaced fuel, grease drippings, divine punishment for subpar loaves. But here, on this damp, quiet morning, no one's in the mood to speculate. They're too busy mourning because this isn't just a fire. This is a disaster. You walk slowly around the remains, careful not to step on still smoking stones. Part of the wall has caved inward, and someone's wooden baking paddle sticks out like a broken limb. The markings are gone. No more carved. Sigils, no scored crusts. Just ash and silence and fear. Because without the oven, what happens now? One woman sits on the grass, cradling her dough. She was next in line. Another mutters about curses. Someone else quietly blames Marjorie because, let's face it, it's easy to do. You glance around. No sign of her. Probably hiding. Or already baking in secret. The Reeve arrives, looking both angry and mildly damp. He asks what's happened. No one answers. Then he asks who lit the fire. Still no answer. Elric opens his mouth, then closes it again. That half-loaf is still in his hand, now hard as a rock. Eventually, the truth trickles out. Someone added kindling late. Someone else stoked the coals too aggressively. And someone, unnamed, may have spilled oil across the hearthstones while trying to grease a baking pan. One error, two errors, then boom, literally. Someone says they heard it all the way from the mill. Another claims a ghost flew out the top. You choose not to comment. What matters now is that the oven is gone. People begin to drift. Some take their dough home, others sit and stare. The kids start playing in the soot before being chased away by someone wielding a wet cloth like a weapon. You stay, because this hurts. It's not just about the bread, it's about the rhythm, the gathering, the ritual. The shared fire, the stolen glances, the occasional plum-filled sabotage. Without the oven, the village feels colder, unglued. You remember stories of this happening before in other places. Whole villages forced to bake in makeshift pits. A town that built an oven on a cart and dragged it from house to house. One legend tells of a baker who just refused to stop baking, even after the fire took her house. She baked on a flat stone for months, under the sky. She called it sky crust. No one liked it, but she didn't stop. You wonder what will happen. Now Elric speaks, voice hoarse. It'll take weeks to rebuild. Someone else adds, if we can. If the Lord lets us, another says. That's the real danger. The oven wasn't just a pile of bricks. It was allowed, sanctioned, a shared utility under watchful eyes. Rebuilding means asking permission. Asking permission means paying fees. The kind of fees measured in coin or worse, grain. And in the meantime, you bake at home maybe, on small stones, on dangerous hearths not meant for it. You risk burns, bad bakes and worse, being seen. Because baking outside the communal system is a kind of rebellion. You glance toward the church tower in the distance. Already someone's been sent to inform the priest. He'll have opinions. Possibly sermons, definitely judgments. You sigh and look back at the ruin. It's still smoldering, the heat whispering of everything it held. Bread, secrets, sins. Someone begins stacking nearby stones, a hopeful gesture. Someone else scoffs. You don't know what will happen next, but you do know this. You still have dough, and you still have fire. And when night falls, you'll gather your courage, find a flat stone behind your hut and bake something imperfect and smoky, because hunger doesn't wait, and neither does memory. And as the smoke rises like a ghost of loaves past, you whisper a quiet promise to the ashes. We'll rebuild you better, hotter, and maybe with a slightly less flammable door. You know it's really bad when the traveling peddlers hear about the oven fire before you can even rewrap your dough. They're already in the village square by the next market day, carts squeaking, bells jingling, and everything smelling faintly of wool vinegar and slightly stale pastries. These aren't just merchants, they're carriers of gossip, recipes, and highly questionable bread innovations. You eye one cart in particular, painted red with faded gold trim and a sign that reads "Pies while you wait." The man beside it grins at you with flour on his beard and a glint in his eye like he's seen too many late-night cheese fires. "Your oven's gone, eh?" he says, before you can even pretend to browse. You nod. He nods back solemnly. Happens, more often than you'd think. You glance down at his wares, portable pies, handheld, crimped edges. Smells like beef and something spicy. Possibly nutmeg, possibly mischief. He taps the oven-shaped box behind his cart. Fire inside, clay-lined, stays hot for 3 hours if I light it at sunrise. He winks. Baked in a ditch once. Rainy, still worked. You take a step back, unsure whether to be impressed or terrified. Another peddler across the square claims to have a foldable oven. She unfolds a piece of cloth and mimics the dome with 2 sticks and a metal tray. "Bread for 1, she says proudly. 2 if you're greedy." Suddenly everyone has solutions. One woman swears she saw a baker in York using a heated plank wrapped in cabbage leaves. A man with a lute offers a song in exchange for some yeast. A monk in a brown cloak sells communion wafers by the handful. "Just add soup," he says. It's chaos, but also hope. You walk among them, half amused, half curious. Because yes, the oven is gone, but these people, these wandering breadsmiths, remind you that heat and flour always find each other again. Historians still argue whether portable baking ever truly worked in the Middle Ages. Some scoff at the idea. Others point to ruins of mobile hearths, like the one on the back of a donkey cart found half buried in Dorset. Was it efficient? Probably not. But was it used? Oh yes. You sample a pie from the red cart man. It burns your tongue. You cry a little. He hands you a cabbage leaf and says, "Happens to the best." The children love it though. They gather around his cart, watching the tiny flames flicker behind the metal door. He even lets one of them poke the dough with a stick. "Don't press too hard," he warns, "or it'll go flat like your cousin's ego." The whole square laughs, and for a moment, the missing oven doesn't feel like a wound. It feels like an invitation. You hear stories. One traveler swears there's a village downriver where they've built 3 small ovens, one for each cluster of huts. "More manageable," he says. "Less politics." You scoff. More ovens, more politics, surely. Another boasts of a mountain town where each household has a clay oven in the yard. "Whole place smells like toast," she says dreamily. But others shake their heads. Too risky, too smoky, too lonely. Because that's the trade-off, isn't it? A personal oven means privacy, control, your own timing, your own rules, but you lose the togetherness, the laughter, the arguments, the burnt loaf that everyone remembers fondly after enough time has passed. Well, maybe not everyone. You walk, past the green cart with the singing baker, who insists his secret is a dough fermented in cider. You're skeptical. He looks very enthusiastic about cider in general. You pause at a stall selling flatbreads wrapped in leaves, stacked like pages of a very chewy book. The woman behind the table says they're market day bread, meant to travel. You ask how long they last. She shrugs. 3 days or one hungry one? Hungry. You take 2. As the peddlers pack up, you hear someone near the edge of the square whisper, "We should build a small oven behind the mill, just for now." Someone else replies, "And when the reeve finds out?" Another voice, "We'll call it a bread-shaped kiln for pots." You don't know if they're joking, and honestly it doesn't matter because ideas are baking now. Rising. You take your new pies and leaf-wrapped flats and head home. Your arms are warm, your belly hopeful. The oven may be gone, but the heat isn't. Not entirely, it's traveling now, in carts, in songs, in cracked clay bowls over campfires, and maybe, just maybe, That's how bread survives. You awaken to the sound of hammers, not just one, many. A clinking, rhythmic chorus coming from the square. You throw on your cloak, grab a hunk of yesterday's flatbread, and follow the noise through morning mist. There, in the grey-blue dawn, you see it. The oven, or rather the skeleton of one. It's half a dome right now, a curved foundation of large stones and packed clay, arranged with more care than you've ever seen the reeve give to anything. And it's not the Lord's masons building it. It's the villagers. Your villagers. Someone's already dug the shallow pit. Others are hauling rocks in wheelbarrows and broken crates. Sabina, the oven keeper, barks orders with authority usually reserved for battlefield commanders and grandmothers. A man you've only ever seen napping is now covered in soot and singing. You blink, chew, and quietly join the line of people passing stones hand to hand. No one speaks much. They don't need to, because the shared oven is coming back. It wasn't supposed to. After the fire, the reeve muttered about private hearths. The church frowned ominously, and a merchant tried to sell everyone individual clay tins with tiny lids. Personal pans for personal souls, he'd called them. And for a few days, the square was quiet. Cold. But something changed. Maybe it was the bland flatbreads. Maybe it was the smoky, sad attempts at solo baking on upturned griddles. Or maybe it was the realization that the square without its hearth wasn't a square at all. Just an empty patch of dirt with too many awkward silences. So, last night, someone must have whispered, "Let's rebuild." And this morning, here. It is. Historians still argue when and why the communal oven faded from use. Some blame urbanization, others improved household hearths. But here now, the reason for its return is simple. Loneliness doesn't feed people. You glance over and spot Marjorie. She's slapping clay with professional-grade vengeance. Someone scratched Disaster 3X into the new base just for fun. She sees it. She laughs and keeps slapping. Even Elric is back, though not as keeper. Just a worker. He's rolling sand between his fingers, murmuring about temperature, control and smoke pathways. Everyone nods like they understand. You spot children carrying buckets of water from the well. A dog barks helpfully. Someone brings bread and cheese for the workers. Not fancy, not fresh, but shared. You take a slice and pass it down the line. It feels right. And then you hear it, humming. Low at first, then rising. A tune you recognize from baking days past. The rhythm of kneading, of rising, of waiting. Someone drums their fingers on a bucket. Someone else joins with spoons. Before long, half the group is singing while placing stones. The oven grows brick by brick under a canopy of song and ash and effort. You pause to wipe your forehead. Kelly, the quiet genius of herbs and timing, leans over and hands you a small wrapped bundle. "Sage," she says, "to bury in the base, for flavor. Or luck." You nod solemnly, as if this is an ancient rite passed down by grandmothers with clay-lined teeth. It might as well be. You tuck the sage into a gap between stones. You don't need permission. You don't need blueprints, you just need hands. Clay, fire, patience, and people. By afternoon, the dome is nearly whole again. The sun shines through gaps, in the roof that weren't there before, and someone has carved tiny marks into the edge, a leaf across a cat face. Yours, your neighbor's, yours again, slightly bigger. It's not just rebuilding the oven, it's reclaiming the story. You hear someone say, "This one will be stronger," another, "hotter." A third, "less likely to explode during plum season." You laugh until your sides ache. The reeve arrives eventually, puffed up like a startled rooster, muttering something about unauthorized masonry. No one stops working. Someone hands him a small pie. He chews it and stays quiet. You think of all the bread yet to come, the next baking day, the next mis-scored loaf, the next inevitable explosion of someone's overambitious honey filling. You smile because it's all coming back, not just the oven but the world around it, the gossip, the games, the warnings scrawled in chalk. The pride in crust. You stand back and watch as the last stones are sealed, the dome smoothed, the chimney placed. Tomorrow it will be lit. The whole village will bring dough, and for the first time in weeks, the air will smell like ambition again. But tonight, Tonight the oven sleeps, and you sleep knowing this. The heat returns, the rhythm resumes, and the fire, no matter how many times it fades, is never truly gone. The oven is hot again. You feel it before you even reach the square. The wave of warmth curling through the early morning fog, like the breath of a slumbering beast reawakened. The scent hits you next. Not smoke exactly, more like the promise of smoke. The kind of heat that knows it has a job to do. You arrive with your dough bundled carefully in your old cloth, the corners tied with twine like you're offering it as a gift, which in a way you are. The rebuilt oven stands proudly at the center of the square, still blackened around the edges, still uneven in places. But it holds, and the fire inside it? Glorious. Sabina stands beside it once more. She's resumed her role as oven keeper, armed with a shovel, a hook, and a clean apron that already has 3 smudges. You're early, but not the first. Never the first. Edith has already placed her loaf near the edge, marked with that same tidy swirl she always uses, like a snail in a hurry. You nod a greeting. She nods back, then narrows her eyes at your dough. New mark? You grin. Figured I'd upgrade. She says. Brave. You laugh. But it's true. Marks matter. Now more than ever. Because after weeks of personal ovens, secret bakes, and wildly inconsistent crusts, everyone's coming back, bringing their loaves, their best guesses, their pride. There's a murmur in the crowd. The priest is approaching. He stands at the edge of the square, hands folded in his sleeves, looking far too serious for a morning that smells like rosemary and anticipation. He steps forward, sprinkles a little water onto the oven, mutters something about sanctity, and then, surprise of all surprises, smiles. May your bread rise as your hearts do, he says, and everyone stares like he's grown a second head. Then he leaves, probably to scold someone about candle wax, but still, progress. You glance around. The mood is different today, lighter. Even the weather has noticed. Blue skies peeking through, a breeze just strong enough to lift flour dust, and childhood memories. People are sharing ingredients again, laughing, complimenting crusts they would have critiqued last month. It's as though the fire has burned away something else too. Bitterness, rivalries, or maybe just the boredom of baking alone. You watch Ellie tuck a bundle of herbs into her dough. Nothing dramatic, just a little thyme, a touch of marjoram. You're tempted to ask for her ratio, but she catches your eye and shakes her head. Trade you, she says, for half a heel later. Done. Children are playing nearby, chasing each other with sticks, pretending to be bread paddles. One girl yells, "Your crust is soggy," and everyone gasps as if she swore. You make a mental note to use that insult the next time someone skips the second rise. You're called forward. Sabina looks at your dough, looks at you, raises an eyebrow. You shrug. I added vinegar to the water. She doesn't speak. Just nods and slides it in, center of the oven, prime spot. The square exhales, loaf by loaf, the oven fills. A symphony of shapes and textures, round, oblong, twisted. Some with seeds, some with salt. One with what might be dried apples if you're feeling optimistic. Historians still debate what communal baking truly meant to villages like this, how it shaped identities or reinforced them. But standing here watching steam rise from crusts and neighbors swap insults so kind they could be compliments, you think maybe the point isn't just the bread, maybe it's the waiting. Because as you sit back, eyes on the hearth, stomach rumbling, in time with someone's goat, you feel the stillness settle, the fire crackles, the dough rises, and all you can do is wait. Together. It's humbling, human, holy, in a way no sermon ever quite managed. You watch your loaf darken to gold, then chestnut. Sabina prods it, nods once, and pulls it free. Steam escapes like a whisper. You take it, cradle it, and tear off a corner before you can stop yourself. It's perfect. Slightly tangy from the vinegar, airy inside, crusted just enough to bite back. You don't need to brag. Your bread speaks for you. And as people gather around the oven, some holding loaves, some holding nothing but stories, you realize this oven isn't just back. It never left, not really. It lived in the hands that rebuilt it, in the mouths that missed it, in the hearts that couldn't quite rise without it. And now, here you all are again, crusts cracking, spirits rising, together. Now, the fire's low, the loaves are gone, eaten, traded, saved, or forgotten. The square is quiet, save for the occasional rustle of wind through cooling ash and the soft scrape of Sabina's shovel as she sweeps out the final embers. You sit nearby, hands wrapped around a cup of something warm, the last heat of the day, settling into your bones. The scent of baked crust lingers like a memory, earthy, sweet, a little smoky. The oven stands still, quiet, but not empty, because inside it lives the rhythm of your days. The hands that built it, the words whispered beside it, the hunger it stilled. Around you the village dims, lanterns flicker in windows. Someone sings a lullaby off-key. A dog groans in its sleep. The night exhales, slowly, steadily, like a loaf cooling on a sill. You think of all the loaves that came before, the ones marked and swapped, the ones burned or forgotten, the ones that told stories without saying a word. You think of the fire, steady and wild, how it always returns, and how it teaches you to wait, to rise, to rest. The oven, now dark, doesn't look lonely. It looks patient. And as your eyes close, you picture it again. The dome, the glow, the circle of people sharing crumbs and glances. Quiet laughter, loud pride. It's just bread, they say, but you know better. It's everything. So sleep now. Let the oven fade into dreams. Let the scent of ash and dough drift into silence. And when you wake, you'll still remember the warmth, the weight, the way we all rise best together.